Hello, and welcome back to the Shakey Sonnet Show. I am Tootight Lautrec, and we're here in the Sonnetarium at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainders section of an unnamed local library which may or may not have some lion couchants coughing on the front steps. When last we discussed the sonnets, I left off at sonnet 30, and the world was imploding. And so I left you in the care of Nurse Helena Handbasket, and here we are again. During the pandemic, all the gyms were closed, but all the cheese shops were open, and quite honestly, the tighter my corset gets, the slower I go. And because it takes quite a bit of time to prepare these lessons and to film them and to force someone to edit them for me, I am going to have to pretend that I've had a historical ectomy, and I don't know when these will be released, but we're filming, and update: pandemic still on, world still crazy. So I hope by the time this comes out things have settled down, but in the meanwhile, let's move forward. Today we're going to look at sonnets 31 and 32, but before we do, I want to just recap my project a little bit. I'm endeavoring to look at each individual sonnet as its own particular thing, and then see how it might or might not fit into the sonnet sequence of 154 sonnets that were printed in the 1609 quarto version. And because Shakespeare was a dramatist, I also want to think about the sonnets in the context of how it might fit into some sort of dramatic moment or in any of the other plays that Shakespeare has done. Thirdly, I want to see if there's any evidence of a gender for the narrator or the subject of the sonnets, just to see what's going on and if we can create some sort of an idea of what might be going on in that particular sonnet and in the sequence as a whole. And the fourth thing I'm going to do is I'm going to indulge myself, and we are going to indulge ourselves, to see if we can construct possible narratives for this particular sonnet sequence from 1 to 154 in the order in which it's written, simply because it's fun and we might as well play around with it. If we're given a sequence of things, we might as well try to construct a narrative, as if it were, for instance, a novel, and each individual sonnet was a chapter in that novel. So while I was doing the Shake Tube this year, I read Love's Labour's Lost and Cymbeline, which had sonnets in them, and I had this brilliant idea that somebody should compile all the sonnets of Shakespeare from all of the plays and all of the sonnet sequence and put them together in one volume. And lo and behold, someone heard my call, and Paul Edmonston and Stanley Wells put forth just such a volume, which is called All the Sonnets of Shakespeare, a rather catchy title. Interestingly enough, I scoured this from front to back, and I found that nowhere do they credit me for the idea, but be that as it may, I still have my legacy as an internationally ignored drag laureate of the Sonnetarium, and I'll have to settle for that. But in this book, they note that they believe that Shakespeare wrote sonnets over almost a 30-year period, from 1582 all the way up to 1613. It's actually quite a nice little book. This is a hardcover book, which I don't always love, but it comes with this handy-dandy little bookmark, which is right in, and it's a gold little bookmark. It's really quite lovely. It's slim and nice to hold. And what they've done is attempted to place every sonnet, from whether it's from the plays or whether it's in the series, in a chronological sequence. So the one that was written first to the one that was written last, which shakes up the whole quarto of 1609 quite a bit. And here's what they say in their introduction. I'll just read to you so you know what their project is. Our chronological approach enhances understanding of Shakespeare as a developing writer of sonnets and challenges the biographical assumptions and expectations that we, as readers, might take with us. A chronological ordering frustrates attempts to assume and impose biographical narrative by, we hope, defamiliarizing the poems and presenting them afresh. Establishing chronologies is one outcome of our wanting to understand as much as possible about Shakespeare's progression and development as a writer. And I am all for that. I would love to have some sort of certainty about which sonnets were written at the very start of his career and which were at the end, to see if there's a strengthening in the middle and a diminution at the end of his life, of his powers, or if it just gets stronger and stronger as we go along. But I do have one gigantic quibble with this book, and I will read you another statement they made, which says, though the sonnet form lends itself to a compressed narrative development across its 14 lines, we do Shakespeare's sonnets, the 1609 quarto version, as a collection a disservice if we go to it expecting to find a story. To which I say, pish posh. Reading is a creative endeavor, and squashing anyone's joy in delving into a creative endeavor should always be discouraged. So we are going to see if we can create a story from the 1609 version, understanding that it won't be a definitive story and that each person's story will differ from every other person's story. But why not have fun? It's in this form, so let's play with it the way that it's given to us. So, to that end, so far we've gotten up to sonnet 30. In sonnets 1 through 7, we have exhortations to a young person to procreate, and there may be a growing fondness from the poet to this said young person. Sonnet 18, the poet finds his or her voice as a poet and says, forget all about procreation. My poems are what will give you eternity. And if we assume there's only one person who is the subject of the poem and only one person who is the narrator of the poem, which is a big assumption, but it's the easiest one because there are multiple possibilities, as we know. After sonnet 18, if we assume that it's one person to another person, things get steamy. Things get sexy, things get hot, until it's practically, I'm your little sex slave. I'm your little sex slave. I can't even say it. I'm your little sex slave at sonnet 26. Well, there's a tongue twister. I'm your little sex slave at sonnet 26. Well, anyway, so that's where it goes. Sonnets 27, 28, and 29, there's some sort of separation of sorts where they seem to be apart physically, and the poet is saying, I'm miserable without you, you're not here. I'm miserable, but I think about you, and then things are okay. I'm all set as long as I think about you. And then we get to sonnet 30, and things get really weird and really woeful, and there's lots of talk about death for the next few poems. And perhaps this is a function of the poems being written in the middle of a pandemic, which, depending on when this comes out, I mean, maybe we'll be up to a quarter of a million Americans dead by that point. But we know that, it's possible. We can sort of sympathize with what's going on during this time. So maybe death is really on the mind of this poet. I would love to read sonnet 30 to you again because of all those wonderful oohs and ohs, but there's only so much time that we have. I did do a lip sync of this sonnet 30, which I will link again below, and I think it's Natasha Richardson's voice that I'm lip syncing, and you can go to that to hear sonnet 30 in all of its glory. So now we're going to go to Sonnet 31, which I call the zombie whore or sex zombie sonnet, which I'm not saying I can relate, but I'm just saying. Now, this may shock you, but there is a way to read Sonnets 31 and 32, which we'll be looking at together, with some sexual innuendo. And it may shock you even more that I didn't notice it at first. This was brought to my attention by Stephen Booth's annotations of the sonnets. So I'll read it to you straight, and then I'll read it bent. I mean, I'll read it once, but we'll talk about it in both of those ways. So, Sonnet 31. Sonnet 31. Thy bosom is endeared with all hearts, which I by lacking have supposed dead. And there reigns love, and all love's loving parts, and all those friends which I thought buried. How many a holy and obsequious tear hath dear religious love stolen from mine eye, as interest of the dead, which now appear but things removed that hidden in their lie. Thou art the grave where buried love doth live, hung with the trophies of my lovers gone, who with all their parts of me to thee did give. That due of many now is thine alone. Their images I loved, I view in thee, and thou, all they, hast all the all of me. So we'll go through this and just kind of figure out what's going on in each sentence. But if you are going to be thinking about the sexualized version of it, I want you to think that parts is often a term for any kind of sexual organ, whether it's a penis or a vagina or any other sexualized part of the body that you might want to think about. Holy implies holes, such as mouths, anuses, vaginas, and there's the word all, which is sometimes thought of as a substitute for penis. So you can keep that in mind as we're going through, but thy bosom, your heart or your actual chest, thy bosom is endeared with all hearts which I, by lacking, by missing, have supposed dead. So in you, I find all the loves of all the people that I've loved, because I'm a zombie whore and they're all dead now. So all their hearts are in you. And there, in your bosom, there reigns love, and all love's loving parts. Well, again, all love's loving parts can be all of love's loving parts. And all those friends which I thought buried. So we're doing it, and you're thinking you're the only one there, but actually it's my entire history behind me. But let's move along. How many a holy and obsequious tear hath dear religious love stolen from mine eye? I cry about my friends who have died, and I pay them the obsequies, the rights that are due to them, as one does at a funeral. And those tears I've shed for them as interest of the dead, which now appear, but things removed that hidden in your breast lie. So all these people who I've missed and all the sorrow that I've had for them, the love that I've had for them comes to rest in you. And here's a line, next time you're in the bar, you can throw this one out. Thou art the grave, which I don't know quite how successful that is, but thou art the grave where buried love doth live, hung with the trophies of my lovers gone, who with all their parts of me to thee did give. That due of many now is thine alone. Everything all of my parts that I've given to them, I'm giving to you now. Their images I loved, I view in thee. Every time I look at you, I see all my dead dears. Isn't that lovely? And thou, all they, hast all the all of me. So you've got it all, baby. You've got me, you've got all my dead lovers. You're rich indeed, and every time we do it, you're doing it with me and everyone I've ever slept with in the past. So isn't that nice? Now, I don't think that's the most flattering sonnet that I've ever heard, and one would like to think of oneself as a true original, not like you want to be like nobody else, not like everybody else in the world, like some conglomerate zombie clusterfuck. You want to be a true original. So we move from this sexy little Frankenstein's monster's pet who's looking at all his dead dears to sonnet 32. And here the poet imagines himself or herself as dead. And the conceit here is, when I die and you look back on all these poems, even if other poets are better than I am and they make better poems, you'll look back on these poems and you'll see that they're not just poems, they are actually distillations of my love for you. And so this is sonnet 32. If thou survive my well-contented day, when that churl death my bones with dust shall cover, and shalt by fortune once more resurvey these poor rude lines of thy deceased lover, compare them with the bettering of the time, and though they be outstripped by every pen, reserve them for my love, not for their rhyme, exceeded by the height of happier men. Oh, then vouchsafe me but this loving thought. Had my friend's muse grown with this growing age, a dearer birth than this his love had brought, to march in ranks of better equipage. But since he died, and poets better prove, theirs for their style I'll read, his for his love. And again, there are possible connotations of sexuality or eroticism. Anytime you see anything with the C-O-N-T, there's some sort of play, or there's a possible play on cunt or some such thing, or some sort of debt being paid in full also. And anytime you come across a pen, a really large, red, upright pen, you may think of other things as well. But let's just go through it word by word. If thou survive my well-contented day, if I've paid up my debts and I'm done for the day and gone, and I die, if you're still living after I die, when that churl death my bones with dust shall cover, when I'm dead and in the grave, and shalt by fortune once more resurvey, and if you shall by chance resurvey these poor rude lines of thy deceased lover, because although I'm an exceptional poet, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, but we know that he does think that he is quite good. And if you compare them with the bettering of the time, or if you compare my poetry with the poetry that comes after me, and though they be outstripped by every pen, if my poems are pale in comparison to the future poems that will be written after I'm dead, reserve my poems for my love, not for their rhyme, exceeded by the height of happier men. So you want to save these poems as a distillation of my love, not for whatever quality they may have if there are better rhymes out there in the world, but the love that's in these will exceed anything that can be written in the future. Oh, then, vouchsafe me but this loving thought. And here, the last 5 lines are a quotation. So it's the poet saying that you should think this thought to yourself. Had my friend's muse grown with this growing age, a dearer birth than this his love had brought. To march in ranks of better equipage. But since he died, and poets better prove, theirs for their style I'll read, his for his love. So if the growing age of my poetry makes them pale in comparison to what comes afterwards, and they're not as strong of a soldier in the lines that come in the world after me, even though he's dead and there are better poets, I know that I will read these for his love. So also there's the possibility that will, every time we come across the word will, it can imply lust, or the male sexual organ, etc., etc., etc. Excuse me. So my question is, what's with all the death? These are supposed to be love poems, and it's an odd placement in this series. And I thought to myself that perhaps it's just a couple of Goths getting off on their own morbid fascinations, could be one example. Possibly there's a hint that the relationship itself is dying, given the separations that we've seen in 27, 28, and 29. And even perhaps if we think of the little death of an orgasm, perhaps these poems are some sort of macabre dance. And instead of the dance of the seven veils, it's sort of the dance of the seven shrouds or something like that. And there are kinky implications. Parts, holy, buried love, which could imply an inserted penis, etc., etc., etc. So a sexually charged reading is possible, but perhaps not the primary impulse. And I do think that it may be something that just happens coincidentally with the language. And, it does give the possibility of a little twist to what otherwise could have been slightly more bitter, even maybe just a bit of a vanilla sort of poem. It gives a little bit of tang to it. Now, as I said, Stephen Booth argues quite convincingly for the sexual innuendo and the eroticism in 31 and 32. Don Patterson, however, disagrees wholeheartedly. I am in the middle, I am in the middle between Don Patterson and Stephen Booth, which is exactly where a zombie whore would like to be, I suppose. So you can decide for yourself whether you think that there is some sexual component to them or not, and you can let me know in the comments. Do we think that there is a male or a female specified in either of these poems? Well, it's not completely clear. And if there are two males, let me just look at this for a second again. I'll get the big red erect feather out of my way while I think about this. There is the line, had my friend's muse grown with this growing age, a dearer birth than this his love had brought. So there is the implication that the poet is a male. And other than that, we don't really know. But in Edmondson and Wells's other book, Shakespeare's Sonnets, they really have a knack for the titles, don't they? All the sonnets of Shakespeare and Shakespeare's sonnets. In this book, which came out quite a while ago, they talk about whether the love that we're hearing about is a friendship love or whether it's a sexualized love. And they note that in the sonnets, the word friend appears 19 times, and the word lover appears in 5 separate sonnets. But the line between the friend, the sex friend and the friend kind of love and the sex kind of love, the line is sort of blurred in the sonnets. It's not quite clear. And I'm not necessarily decided, which is why I'm looking at it in the context of the rest of the sonnet. So if we were to think about dramatic possibilities for this, I could think that this was perhaps a sonnet sent between Othello and Desdemona before everything falls apart. Maybe it's a presaging the horror that's to come. It could be Hamlet and Ophelia. It could be Gertrude and Claudius, or vice versa after Hamlet's father is killed and they marry one another. So it could be many of those things or anything else. What do you think? If you have an idea of where this might fit in to a play, or if you have an idea of whether it's sexualized or not, or any other comments or observations, please let me know in the comments section. And until we meet again, just remember that the world is full of wonder, and all you have to do is pay attention before you die. I'm Tootight Lautrec.